The downtown Chicago café buzzed quietly around me that afternoon. Soft conversations, the low hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of fresh ground coffee mixing with the damp, rainy scent drifting in from the street. I sat alone at a corner table, running my fingertip endlessly around the rim of a latte I hadn't touched. I'd come here to think, to get away from the suffocating sameness of our house. But being alone only made the doubts louder. They chewed at me in silence. Across the room, I noticed him. Not because he stood out, he didn't. He was just there. A man in a perfectly ordinary grey suit, so unremarkable he almost disappeared into the background like a shadow. Then he started walking toward me with the calm confidence of someone who already knew I wouldn't say no. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. His voice was even, almost gentle. I blinked, startled. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he said, and before I could respond, he was already sliding into the seat across from me. He set his black coffee down and looked straight into my eyes. "But I know your husband, Adam, and I know exactly what he's been doing." My heart lurched. "Excuse me." He leaned forward just enough that the space between us felt smaller. His face stayed completely calm. "Your husband is sleeping with my wife, Emily Reed. It's been going on for months." The words landed like a blade, clean, cold, final. Everything tilted. I stared at him, searching for anger, for cruelty, for any sign that this was some sick joke. There was nothing, just quiet, unshakable certainty. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Lucas Reed," he said simply. Then, before I could even draw breath to speak, he added, and before you do anything impulsive, before you storm home, scream at him or call a lawyer, don't divorce yet. If you move first, you lose." Those last 4 words hit me hardest. If you move first, you lose. I sat frozen while he spoke. He didn't rush. He laid it out like strategy notes on a board. This wasn't about catching them in the act, wasn't about tears or confrontation. It was about timing, patience over passion, evidence over emotion, waiting in the dark until the perfect moment arrived. By the time he stood up to leave, the cafe noise had faded to a dull hum in my ears. I was no longer just the blindsided wife who'd been trying to convince herself everything was fine. I was in the game now, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the one being played. In the quiet hours after I left the cafe, my mind kept circling back to the beginning, to the marriage I'd once believed was rock solid, the one place I felt truly safe. Adam and I had met in college. We were both the serious types, the ones who rolled our eyes at all the loud, dramatic couples around us. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared career goals, and a quiet agreement that life didn't need to be chaotic to be meaningful. Our wedding was small and simple, no extravagant venue, no over-the-top vows, just us, a handful of friends, and the promise we made in front of the people who mattered most. After that, life settled into a steady, predictable rhythm. Work filled our weekdays. Weekends were for errands, movies on the couch, the occasional dinner out. Adam's job as a financial consultant kept him busy. Long hours, client dinners, and the occasional overnight trip. But he always came home. Always. I used to take comfort in that word. Always. Dinners followed a calendar I could set my watch to. Pasta on Tuesdays, takeout on Fridays, grilled chicken and salad the rest of the week. We didn't have fireworks. We didn't need them, I told myself. We had something better, consistency. No screaming matches, no slammed doors, no grand romantic gestures that faded the next morning. Just 2 people who showed up for each other day after day. I had convinced myself this was what real, mature love looked like. Not the wild rush of passion, but the calm comfort of habit. The kind of love that didn't demand constant proof because it was simply there. But that night, sitting alone in the dim glow of our living room lamp, everything looked different. And I stared at the wedding photo on the mantel, the one where we're both smiling, still a little awkward in our new roles as husband and wife, and the cracks I'd ignored for years suddenly stood out in sharp relief. Quiet didn't mean loyal. Consistency could hide indifference just as easily as it could signal devotion. The routines I'd once found reassuring now felt like camouflage. We confuse consistency with commitment, I thought, the words bitter on the inside of my mind. It's such an easy mistake, especially for people like me, adults who had quietly traded big dreams for stability, who told themselves that steady was the same thing as safe. Only now did I see how hollow that foundation really was. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep standing on it anymore. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. Quiet. And almost polite, like whispers you only hear once the room has gone still. Adam started coming home later than usual. At first it was once or twice a week, then more often. Always the same excuses. Traffic was brutal, a client meeting ran long, he had to grab a quick drink with the team to close a deal. I nodded, said, of course, and went back to whatever I was doing. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife. I didn't want to be that cliché. His phone used to lie face up on the kitchen counter, notifications lighting up like little fireworks, work emails, sports scores, the occasional meme from a friend. Then, without any announcement, it started staying face down. Every time. A small change, but it felt deliberate, like a door quietly closing between us. There was the perfume too. Not strong, not obvious, just a faint, unfamiliar sweetness that clung to the collar of his shirt when I pulled it from the laundry basket. I'd press my face to the fabric for a second, breathing it in, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the dry cleaner had switched detergents. Maybe it was from sitting next to someone on the train. I told myself 100 reasonable lies because the alternative hurt too much to look at directly. And then came the gym membership he never used to mention. New button-down shirts in colours he'd never worn before. A different haircut, a new cologne, the way he suddenly cared about how his jawline looked in the mirror. After years of comfortable complacency, of sweatpants on weekends and zero effort to impress, none of it added up. But none of it screamed either. There were no screaming red flags, no lipstick stains, no late-night texts lighting up the screen while he showered, no hotel keycards falling out of his pockets. Just fragments. A credit card receipt for a restaurant I'd never been to. A work trip to a city he'd never mentioned before. A weekend, he said he had to stay late at the office, but his location history, the one we'd both agreed to share years ago for safety, showed him somewhere else entirely. They were all such ordinary things, the kind of details you could easily brush off as paranoia if you tried hard enough. And I did try. God, I tried. But patterns don't lie, they don't shout, they just keep showing up, patient and persistent, piling up like dust on shelves you haven't touched in years. Each one small enough to ignore on its own, until one day you realize the whole shelf is covered, and the air feels thick with what you've been refusing to see. For women like me, who've lived the everyday truth of long marriages, who know that love isn't always dramatic, but can still die quietly, these little changes cut deeper than any big betrayal ever could. They're relatable, they're real, and worst of all, they're the kind of things so many of us have felt creeping in, wondering if we're imagining it, wondering if we're the ones going crazy. I wasn't imagining it. And I was starting to understand that the quietest betrayals are the ones that hurt the longest. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air bites just enough to make you feel alive. I was downtown running mindless errands, dry cleaning, pharmacy, the usual Saturday nothing, when I passed a small café with warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Something made me slow down. Then I saw them through the window, Adam and her. She wore a deep wine-coloured coat that caught the light like spilled Merlot. They sat close, closer than the colleagues, closer than friends. His hand covered hers on the table, fingers laced together like it was the most natural thing in the world. She laughed at something he said. Head tilted back, throat exposed. The kind of unguarded laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me in the very beginning, like she was the only person in the room, like she was the answer to a question he'd stopped asking me long ago. I stopped breathing. I stood there on the sidewalk, half hidden behind a group of tourists, and watched my marriage die in real time. No shouting, no dramatic discovery in our bedroom. Just this quiet, intimate moment that didn't belong to me. She reached out and touched his forearm, light, familiar, possessive. He didn't pull away. He leaned in. That was the moment everything crystallized. Months of half-noticed changes, of excuses and silences and perfume that wasn't mine, suddenly made perfect, brutal sense. A person can lie calmly when the lie has become routine. I knew her name now, Emily, but in that instant she wasn't a name. She was proof, living, breathing, laughing proof. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I waited for the tears, the rage, the urge to march in there and shatter their little world. None of it came. Instead, something cold and clear settled in my chest. I turned and walked away before they could see me, and the image of them burned behind my eyes like a photograph I'd never be able to delete. Words weren't necessary anymore. I had seen enough. Back home, I slipped right back into the role I'd played for years. The oblivious, supportive wife. I cooked dinner the way I always had. His favourite chicken with roasted vegetables. Nothing too fancy, just familiar. When he walked through the door, I smiled, asked how his day went, listened to the same vague answers about meetings and deadlines. I even reached for him that night in bed, let my hand rest on his chest, pressed a kiss to his shoulder. Every touch tasted like ashes. Every word felt rehearsed. But I delivered the performance flawlessly because I had to. Behind the mask, though, something else was waking up. I started a notebook, small, plain, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore. I hid it at the back of my nightstand drawer, under a stack of old receipts and a half-read novel. Every night after he fell asleep, I'd pull it out under the faint glow of my phone screen and write. Times he came home late, exact excuses he gave. The days the perfume lingered strongest on his clothes. The weekends he claimed he was working from home, but left the house for hours. Every tiny anomaly went in there, dated and detailed. It wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. I also made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, someone recommended quietly by a friend who'd been through this before. We met during what I told Adam was a long lunch with a client. In a plain office with too much beige and not enough light, she explained the rules of the game I was now forced to play. Evidence mattered more than emotion. In timelines mattered more than tears. Photos, receipts, messages, financial trails. Those were what courts listened to. Suspicion alone, it was nothing. Suspicion is not evidence, she said, looking me straight in the eye. You have to build a case that speaks for itself, and you have to do it without him knowing you're building anything at all. So I kept waiting. Sharing a bed with him became the hardest part. Every night I lay there listening to his steady breathing, feeling the warmth of the man who had chosen someone else, and the loneliness hit me in waves so deep I sometimes forgot how to breathe. I knew the truth. I carried it like a stone in my chest. But I couldn't say a word, not a single one, because one slip, one angry outburst, one suspicious question, and the whole fragile plan would collapse. He'd cover his tracks. He'd get careful. He'd win. I refused to let that happen. My silence wasn't surrender. It was armor. My patience wasn't weakness. It was sharpening itself into a blade. I cooked. I smiled. I waited. And every entry in that hidden notebook brought me one step closer to the day I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. We started meeting in neutral places, different cafes each time, never the same one twice, always somewhere public, but quiet enough to talk without being overheard. No dramatic cloak and dagger nonsense, just two people who looked like they were catching up over coffee. That was the point. Blend in. Lucas was always early, always composed. He'd already ordered black coffee for him, whatever I wanted for me, and he'd sit with his back to the wall, scanning the room once when I arrived, then relaxing just enough to seem normal. Oh, he didn't waste words. On our third meeting, he slid a plain manila envelope across the table, then placed a small black flash drive beside it. "Open it when you're alone," he said quietly. "But this is the first real piece." Inside the envelope were photos, sharp, time-stamped, taken from a distance but clear enough that there was no mistaking the subjects. Adam and Emily, walking out of a midtown hotel hand in hand. Another of them inside a restaurant, heads close over a shared dessert. A third of them stepping into an elevator together, his arm around her waist. Professional shots, no grain, no blur. A private investigator had done the work. The flash drive held more, scanned emails, hotel confirmation receipts in both their names, in a few credit card statements showing overlapping charges on nights he'd told me he was working late. Dates, times, locations, all lined up perfectly with the excuses I'd logged in my notebook. I stared at the photos until my eyes burned. There it was. Undeniable. Not suspicion, not a feeling. Proof. Lucas watched me without speaking for a long minute. "This is just the start," he finally said. "We're not throwing darts here. We're building a fortress, not a flimsy case. Every piece has to be clean, documented, admissible. No emotion, no shortcuts." I nodded, throat tight. For the first time in months, the knot of doubt in my chest loosened. No more lying awake, wondering if I was crazy, if I was reading too much into nothing, if I was the problem. Here was the truth in black and white, cold, factual, impossible to gaslight away. And something shifted inside me that day. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore, the one who cooked dinner and smiled through the pain. I was starting to feel like someone who could decide what happened next. Lucas and I weren't friends, not really. We weren't flirting or leaning into some rebound fantasy. What we had was simpler and sharper, shared pain, shared purpose. We were two people who'd been lied to by the same two people, and we were done being victims. We were becoming architects. Together, we mapped out the next steps. More surveillance if needed, more financial trails to follow, more patience while the evidence piled higher. Every meeting ended the same way. A quiet agreement to keep going, to stay silent, to wait until the case was ironclad. By the time I walked out of that cafe, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket and the photos folded carefully in my bag, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt dangerous. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the danger wasn't coming for me. It was coming from me. One evening we met at our usual quiet spot, a small dimly lit bar tucked away on a side street where no one knew either of our names. Lucas arrived first, as always. When I sat down, he didn't bother with small talk. He simply reached under the table and slid a sleek black briefcase toward me. It was heavier than it looked. I glanced around, nobody watching, then clicked the latches open just enough to see inside. A neat stack of documents, professionally bound. I skimmed the top page, a proposed settlement from Lucas's own impending divorce. The number jumped out immediately. $100 million. Cash, the assets, property division, all laid out in clean, cold legalese. There was a single handwritten note clipped to the front. Condition: Claire waits 3 full months before filing anything. No contact with Adam about divorce, no hints, nothing. I looked up at Lucas. He was watching me steadily, the way he always did when he was about to say something that would change the rules of the game. "This buys us time," he said quietly. "3 months gives us the window to finish gathering everything we need. More financial trails, more timestamps, more proof that can't be explained away. If we file at the same moment, synchronized, they won't have a chance to hide assets or rewrite stories. We hit them clean." I closed the briefcase slowly. My fingers felt numb. It wasn't bribery, not exactly. And the money wasn't for my silence forever. It was for my silence now, for control of the timeline, for making sure we struck when the evidence was overwhelming and their defenses were down. Leverage, pure and simple. Still, it felt like crossing a line I hadn't known was there. I thought about walking away, about telling him no, that I didn't want any part of this, that I'd handle my own divorce on my own terms. But then I remembered the photos, the receipts, the nights I'd lain awake next to a stranger who used to be my husband. I remembered how long I'd already waited, how carefully I'd built my own quiet case. 3 more months wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I opened the briefcase again, took the top document, and signed where the yellow tab indicated. My signature looked small and steady on the page. Lucas exhaled, I almost imperceptibly. "This is not revenge," he said, repeating the words like a mantra we both needed to hear. "This is timing." In that moment, sitting there with the weight of the briefcase between us, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me from the very first day in that Chicago café. Victory doesn't come from the loudest scream or the quickest slap. It comes from orchestration, from moving pieces into place while the other side still thinks they're winning. I slid the signed papers back across the table, and just like that, the clock started ticking in our favor. Those 3 months passed in a strange, suspended kind of quiet. On the surface, nothing changed. I still made coffee in the morning, still left notes on the fridge about groceries, still kissed Adam goodbye when he left for work. But underneath, I was doing something entirely different. I audited the affair the way a forensic accountant would go through crooked books, methodical, emotionless, relentless. I started with the bank statements. Every month I downloaded the PDFs from our joint account and cross-referenced them against the excuses he gave. A $320 dinner at a place we'd never been to together. A hotel charge in a suburb he'd said he was stuck in traffic near. A wire transfer to a name I didn't recognize until I Googled it and found it linked to Emily's LLC. I highlighted, dated, annotated. Every line item became another brick. I tracked the GPS data from the shared family app we'd set up years ago for safety. He'd never turned it off, probably assumed I never checked. I did. Every Friday night when he said he was working late, and the little blue dot showed him parked outside a sleek condo building downtown, I screenshot the maps, noted the timestamps, saved them in a password-protected folder labeled Taxes 2025 on my laptop. No one would ever look twice at that. I dug deeper. A quick public record search showed a lease for that same condo in Emily's name, signed 6 months earlier. Utilities in both their names. A joint Amazon Prime account I found buried in an old email thread. The Florida trip he'd billed as a conference last spring. The airline tickets were booked under the same confirmation number as hers. No conference badge photos on his phone, just selfies of the two of them on a balcony overlooking the ocean. Adam grew careless because I never confronted him. No questions, no tears, no sudden coldness. He started leaving his phone unlocked on the counter again. He stopped double-checking his excuses. He even mentioned Emily from marketing once over dinner, casual as anything, testing the water. I smiled and asked how her project was going. He relaxed even more. His lies got bolder because he thought he was safe. While he whispered sweet nothings to her on late-night calls he took in the guest room, I was building something else. A dossier that didn't need to shout. It simply accumulated weight, photos, receipts, timelines, location data, financial trails. Every piece interlocking like gears in a machine I was assembling in the dark. Silence became my power. The quieter I stayed, the louder the evidence grew. This wasn't rage. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. And this was cold-blooded strategy, taking the raw material of betrayal and forging it into a blueprint for justice. By the end of those 3 months, the folder on my laptop was thick with files. Not one page carried emotion, just facts, dates, proof, and facts, I was learning, don't forgive. They just wait, patiently, until it's time to speak. The real escalation came quietly, the way the worst betrayals often do. One afternoon, while I was cross-checking another batch of bank statements, I found it. A recurring ACH transfer labelled rent, going from Adam's personal account, not our joint one, to an address I didn't recognise. I already knew the building. It was the same sleek condo downtown where his GPS dot had been lingering every Friday and Saturday night for months. I pulled up the public property records again, just to be sure. And the lease was in Emily's name, but when I dug into the utility bills attached to that address, electric, water, internet, they showed both names. Adam Reed and Emily Reed. Joint account holders, starting 6 weeks earlier. They weren't just meeting there anymore, they were living there. I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the screen, the room suddenly too quiet. This wasn't a fling in hotel rooms or stolen afternoons. This was a household. Shared bills, shared responsibilities, shared life. The kind of life he and I had once pretended to build together. It felt like the final nail. Not in my heart, but in their denial. Cohabitation isn't just emotional proof, it's legal dynamite. In most states, once two people start living together openly as a couple, it changes everything in a divorce. More alimony claims evaporate or get slashed dramatically. Assets get harder to hide because there's a paper trail tying them to a shared domestic reality. Courts look at cohabitation and see commitment, not coincidence. And once that threshold is crossed, excuses collapse. I printed the lease summary, the utility statements, the transfer records, added them to the folder. No emotion in the action, just another piece sliding into place. Adam still came home most nights, still kissed me on the cheek, still asked what was for dinner like nothing had changed. But now I knew. The home he was really building wasn't here. It was across town, in a condo with her name on the mailbox and his toothbrush by the sink. The affair had evolved, from secret meetings to something settled, something official in every way that mattered, and that sealed it. And there was no more room for plausible deniability, no more, it's just work or we're just friends. They had crossed the line from deception to domestic partnership, and every document proved it. For me, it wasn't heartbreak anymore, it was clarity. The clock was almost up on those 3 months Lucas and I had agreed on. Soon, very soon, the synchronized filings would drop. And when they did, Adam and Emily would wake up to a reality they couldn't charm or lie their way out of. Because the truth doesn't need drama to destroy a lie, sometimes it just needs a shared utility bill. It was an ordinary Monday morning, the kind where the city wakes up slowly and nothing feels particularly important. Until it does. At exactly 9 a.m., my lawyer filed the petition for divorce. Across town, at the same precise minute, Lucas's lawyer did the same. No fanfare, no dramatic phone calls, no final confrontations or ultimatums. Just 2 sets of documents dropped into the system simultaneously, like perfectly timed dominoes. I wasn't there to see their faces when the process servers arrived. I didn't need to be. I imagined it instead. Adam opening the door in his work shirt, still half asleep, signing for a thick envelope without thinking. Emily doing the same at their condo, maybe in yoga pants, coffee in hand. The moment they opened the packets and saw the words "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage" staring back at them, mine naming Adam, his naming Emily, their carefully constructed worlds would crack open without a sound. No shouting, no tears in front of me, no chance to beg or bargain or spin new lies. Just the cold delivery of consequences. It was checkmate. I sat in my car a few blocks away from our old house that morning, engine off, watching the street like it was a stage I'd already left. My phone stayed silent. No frantic calls from Adam yet. He was probably still processing. Good, let him sit with it. Evidence doesn't raise its voice. It simply exists. And mine existed in overwhelming volume. Timelines, receipts, location data, shared leases, financial trails. Every piece I'd collected in silence over those long months now spoke louder than any argument ever could. Excuses evaporated the second the filings hit the docket. There was nothing left for them to say that the documents didn't already contradict. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The game wasn't over, but the endgame had begun, and for once, I wasn't the one waiting to be hurt. In the courtroom smelled like old paper and faint coffee, sterile, air-conditioned, utterly without drama. I sat on one side of the aisle in a plain navy dress I'd bought specifically for days like this. Nothing flashy, nothing emotional, just composed. Adam sat across from me, flanked by his lawyer, looking smaller than I remembered. He avoided my eyes. Emily wasn't there. Her case with Lucas was being heard in a different courtroom down the hall, but the outcomes would mirror each other in all the ways that mattered. There were no tearful monologues, no dramatic outbursts, no finger-pointing accusations echoing off the walls. Just stacks of binders on the table in front of the judge. My evidence, Lucas's evidence, all cross-referenced, tabbed, time-stamped. The lawyers spoke in calm, measured tones, walking the judge through the facts like accountants reviewing ledgers. Here's the timeline of the affair. Here are the financial trails. Here's the proof of cohabitation. Here's how assets were concealed or misreported. The judge asked a few questions, precise, procedural. My lawyer answered with pages ready. Adam's side tried to argue mitigation, emotion, irreconcilable differences without fault. But the documents were relentless. Fault was written in every line item. Verdicts came faster than I expected. The divisions were fair but firm. No alimony for Adam given the cohabitation evidence. Equitable split of marital assets, but with adjustments for dissipation. My separate savings and post-separation earnings protected. Clean, decisive, favouring the one who came prepared. I didn't cry, I didn't smile either, and I just nodded once when the judge finished reading the order. As I walked out of the building into the bright afternoon light, the message settled deep. Courts don't adjudicate feelings. They weigh facts. Preparation beats passion every time. My patience, the months of silence, the hidden notebook, the synchronized strikes, hadn't been weakness. It had been the strongest weapon I owned. And in the end, it turned out to be unassailable. I didn't need to raise my voice to win. I just needed to let the truth do it for me. The papers were signed, the keys handed over, the last box carried out. And just like that, the house that had once held our life together was empty of us. I sold it quickly, faster than I expected. The market was kind, or maybe I just didn't care enough to haggle. Either way, the money landed in my account, clean and final, and I walked away without looking back. No lingering in doorways, no last glances at the kitchen where I'd cooked so many silent dinners. I was done. I kept the apartment small at first, a one-bedroom downtown with big windows and a view of the lake that turned silver in the mornings. Nothing fancy, just mine. I filled it slowly. Books I'd always wanted to read, plants that needed watering, a record player I hadn't touched since college. Little things that reminded me life could still have texture, even after everything had gone flat. I started traveling alone, Not grand escapes, just weekends in places I'd never bothered to go before. A cabin in Michigan in the fall, leaves crunching under my boots. A quiet beach town in winter where the ocean sounded louder than my thoughts. I ate meals by myself in restaurants without feeling awkward, and I walked trails at my own pace. I slept in the middle of the bed because no one else was there to claim the other side. There was no petty revenge, no late-night text, no social media subtweets, no spreading stories to mutual friends. I didn't need to hurt them to feel better. Hurting them wouldn't have undone the months I'd spent pretending. What I needed, what I finally got, was relief. A clean slate, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like silence anymore. It feels like space. Lucas and I drifted apart naturally. We texted once or twice after the hearings, short check-ins, polite updates. Then the messages slowed, then stopped. Our alliance had served its purpose. Success dissolved it. He wasn't a friend I kept close, and I wasn't one for him either. We'd been partners in a very specific war, and when the war ended, so did the partnership. No hard feelings, just two people who'd needed each other for a season and then moved on. Some evenings I stand at the window of my new place, coffee in hand, watching the Chicago skyline light up against the dark. The city keeps moving, cars streaming across bridges, lights flickering in 1,000 windows. And I feel strangely at peace with it all. I didn't win because I waited. I won because I waited with purpose. Every late night logging details, every secret meeting with Lucas, every time I swallowed the urge to scream and chose silence instead. It wasn't passivity. It was deliberate. It was strategy. It was choosing the long game over the quick explosion. In a world full of loud betrayals, people who scream, who post, who make scenes, I chose the quiet path. And in the end, that quiet carried more weight than any outburst ever could. The truth passed through the house like a cold wind. It took everything that wasn't real and left only what could stand. And what stood finally was me.